So I'm going to do the next stage in several parts, several stages, but just talking you through first how you're going to go from your worked up A4 composition to starting a painting and then developing the painting. Some of you may have started that already, and others will begin it now, Monday morning, and go so far. But then I suppose one of the advantages, looking for advantages of our current circumstances, is that you don't have to work on things just within that limited time of a day class or an evening class. You can work a little bit and then leave it and go back to it, which is probably a more natural way to work. So I had suggested you worked up one of your studies, which I've done here in the middle. I told you at the end of the last video that I felt I wanted to be somewhere between these two, not so close as this, but maybe not as far back as that. So what I've done, I'll take these out of the way, because the middle one is the composition I want to work with, but I have cut myself a mount, and I think what I want is to go in a bit closer and to decide. What I felt about this composition was there's a lot of attention drawn to the underneath of the desk, and I just don't think that's very interesting, and I could put something in there, but that's not what I'm after. Whereas if I cut this mount and crop the composition a bit more, that's helping me identify the aspects that I like. I'm aware that the format isn't exactly what my canvas is going to be, but something like that is the sort of composition that I would like to work on. So this is a useful thing to do. You can do your drawing and still think, well, it's not quite right, but cut a window mount, move things around until you get the arrangement that you like. So this is what I'm going to work with, and I have a canvas ready. So let's get this set up so that I've got my drawing displayed next to my canvas, and my first stage is basically going to be to transfer this drawing to the canvas, and we'll have to put this where I can see it, but you won't see it. That's okay. So I've just put it at the top of my canvas so that I can work from that, and I'm set up here now with my palette, and I've just put out some burnt umber, and I've got some white spirit, and I'm going to sketch out my study, which has fallen off, onto the canvas. And if I bring that forward, I hope you're going to be able to see it. You won't see the study, but you'll see what happens on the canvas. So this is a bit of a refresher, really, in how to go from a study to a painting. I'm working in oils, and I know not everyone is set up to do that, but I'm sure if I work in oils and try and talk you through what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, you'll be able to translate it into whatever you're working with. And what I've been doing with my own work quite a lot recently is working on a white canvas, because I quite like to have some of the white show through the colours when I block in. But again, in the studio I will have been encouraging some of you to tint your canvas first, so do what feels comfortable. But with very dilute burnt umber, so brown, I sketch out some of the main lines, shapes in my painting. So I think I'm probably going to start with a curtain, and I'm just working out. I think I've placed iris in the middle, which I think is okay. I know people often feel you shouldn't put things in the middle, but I think if the problem with having something in the middle is that you've got a symmetrical painting, and you don't want symmetry, because sometimes symmetry is a bit too static, or you want something a bit more dynamic, then just check that other aspects of the composition aren't symmetrical. And if we just look up at my picture, it's not symmetrical. Iris is in the middle, but I've got the window on the one side, which is light and quite different from the fireplace on the left. So I'm reassured that symmetry is okay. This is the first challenge, trying to fit. I did rather a small head, and I didn't leave enough space up there actually. I think the head should be down here. So this is fine. This is why I do the first stage with thin paint, because you want to be able to change it very easily. I'm still trying to make the transition from my drawing onto the first stage of the painting. But I'm trying to keep the paint fairly thin, because if I want to, I'll be able to rub it out or smudge it. And provided I'm not too confused by any of the stray lines. But I'm not using a very small brush. I will in a minute use a very small brush, but I'm keeping this fairly broad because I'm just trying to establish some of the main parts. And it takes a while to get used to what's in your drawing. I'm also aware that my drawing and my canvas aren't exactly the same format. My drawing is a little bit wider, I think. Oh, maybe not, maybe they are the same. Anyway, so we've got some curtain here, and then I'm starting on the mantelpiece. And I'd selected this particular, I cropped it in this way because I thought it was quite nice to have a quiet, darker part of the painting with the fireplace. But also I cropped it so that there was something interesting up here. I heard this good bit of advice once about composition. If you look at the four corners of your composition and try and see if things are different, not to have the same thing in each corner, but something dark, something light, different shapes, just to check the variety in your composition by comparing the four corners. So that's, I think, things placed as they are in the drawing. Probably got a little bit confused between what's window. So her head is there, that's the bar of the window, that's maybe the window sill. And then that's going to be somewhere around here as the top of the desk. So that's my initial and fairly approximate. I don't know, we might have a bit more curtain. Maybe I'm making this up a bit now, but I've decided to bring the curtain in there. The carpet. So hopefully that is a useful demonstration of what I would do first. I'm going to pause the video and then I'm going to go back over that with some stronger marks and probably a slightly thinner brush because I want it to be fairly precise. So I'm now going to use quite a thin brush, a sable brush. I'm still working with the burnt umber, but now I've got a bit less of the spirit and a bit more paint. So that into this very loose start, I am now going to do some much more definite drawing. So I'll start with refining, where is this hair? I think there's no harm if you do start with the head in trying to work with the shape of the hair, but don't get caught up in features, not yet. The shape of the hair, the ear, can be quite good at helping you judge proportion. So this is the next stage, which I don't necessarily need to film in its entirety, but I'll do a few minutes of firstly strengthening her figure, and then strengthening some of the background, possibly also blocking in some of the tonal pattern, which will be quite useful because, as I've said, I've taken to working on white here, and by blocking in just with my brown start, I can establish which are the lighter and darker parts of the painting. And I think if I've got any sort of theme for my painting, apart from this figure in the interior, I want to work with light and create a certain amount of atmosphere, a mood, which is to do with the lighter part of the painting, the light showing through the window, and then a more kind of mysterious, shadowy part on the left. So as well as placing a figure in an interior in a convincing way, I'm after a certain mood and atmosphere. And I'm going to convey that largely through the light. So there I've done a bit to Iris, and I'm still a little bit confused about the height of this desk. I think it's probably there. Doesn't necessarily matter. Could be a bit higher or a bit lower, so long as it looks believable. So that would be the next stage then, getting things blocked in. I think that's a bit of shutter, and then that's a bit of the window bar. Getting things blocked in, not blocked in, no, getting things really strengthened, the drawing strengthened. And as well as that, with a little brush, I might go back to a slightly bigger brush and darken the bigger shapes. And maybe I just need a few lines for the carpet. What I also liked and want to make something of is the way that Iris was sitting with 1 foot back and 1 foot forward. So again, it's not so symmetrical. It's a more interesting, natural way that she's sitting that I want to make a feature of. So let's don't do any more. And just go back to my slightly bigger brush. It's not really that big, but with that I could maybe just knock back some of these areas, like fill in the fireplace. In my charcoal drawing, my charcoal and chalk, I've also done a certain amount of hatching, and because this canvas is, well, it's got gesso on it, but it's not the best quality, so it's very absorbent actually. So my paint runs out quite quickly. It's getting absorbed, but I can just do that sort of hatching across here, which is busy, but it does identify some of these parts of the composition as being darker, quieter, and it's going to help make the light bits more visible. But if I had a rag to hand, I might even smudge some of that. So I'm going to pause again while I mix up some paint, and it'll also allow some of this to soak in a bit, so that my first underdrawing stage can almost dry just by soaking in, and I'll be able to work on top of it. I suppose I could just do a little bit more. Some of the dark shapes, like in her hair, some of the patterns of shadows across her. That leg is dark. Just a little bit of tonal variation. Okay, so next is colour, and I'll be blocking in colour with pieces of card, pre-mixed colours that I'll get ready on the palette, and blocking that in. So I could just show you the two of them together, so you can see where that's come from. So I'm going to do a little bit of painting now. I have pre-mixed some of the colours here on my palette, and generally I've mixed a light and dark version for each area because I'm going to be blocking in, and I'll try and start with some of the bigger areas, maybe some of them what I think are the more significant areas, and I think I'll start with the curtains actually. So I've made a dark red because that's the colour of these curtains, and you'll see I'm applying the paint with pieces of card in the way that I encourage you to do. What I'm going to have to do just for time wise is try and show you some basic pointers reminding you, about getting a painting started, blocking colour in, and then because I'm limited with my filming, I'll work on the painting further and then just send you a photograph of it. But this is just to remind you a little bit about getting the painting started. Having drawn things out, I'm now just trying to identify areas that are significant. So big shapes in the background is quite a good place to start, but I would also quite soon move on to the figure so that I work on the two together. I think often a dark colour, in my experience, makes a difference. That's why I've gone for that dark colour of the curtain. I also mixed up a slightly lighter curtain colour. Another thing about this filming is I haven't tried these colours out, so they may not be quite right. But the nice thing with oil paint is I can change them, but I won't do that while you're watching. So there might be some adjusting. Okay, so that's a bit of curtain. What else is significant? I think it might be quite good to get some of these darker areas of the window as well blocked in, and I'm also going to put some light in the window. And again, because it's oil paint, I can have a go with these colours, see whether I like them, and adjust them. I've got stocks of colour as I showed you on the palette, so if I discover I'm not so keen on those colours, I'll just modify them. So that's some of the dark of the window, and then I've made, that was just a grey. This is a sort of off-white. I've added some white and some orange and a tiny bit of ultramarine, because I may eventually get lighter in that window. But part of what I'm trying to discover here is how these colours work together. And so by not going for pure white, but putting a bit of orange in it, I've given it a certain temperature, and it's not absolutely white, so I can get lighter if I need to. So that's some of that up there, and you can see this is great working with card because everything just gets covered quite quickly. And boy, is it good to be working with oil paint as well. So let's get a little bit in the background here as well. So the blocking in is helping me see how the colours work. It's also gradually getting rid of the white. So that's another benefit, another important stage to get to. So that's some of the slightly duller colour, because the left half of my composition, the fireplace and the mantelpiece, is not so colourful. So I'm only going so far because I haven't mixed enough paint. But it's to give you an idea. If I work on these areas that are next to each other, it'll give you some idea. And me some idea of how these colours suit each other. And I also thought, so I haven't done anything to the figure yet. I just do a little bit more to the desk. And then I've sort of got fairly close to the figure. And I can work a bit with the figure. So you'll see that initial drawing I did has soaked into the canvas. So I can put paint on top of it. It doesn't disappear too much. And for the top of the desk, and again, I don't know if this is quite right, I've got a fairly bright pale orange. That also looks a bit wide. I think I'm missing something. Top of the desk is probably much more foreshortened. Might need a bit more windowsill. So then I'll use slightly smaller bits of card. I've tried out some mixtures for the darker colours of Iris's cardigan. And for all of this, I'm being guided by the drawing, because I think the whole process of drawing is so good for helping you simplify. It's quite possible that as I block this in, I'm not being very precise. But I think that's okay. I'll go back to, when I get to a next stage, there will be a chance to refine. But I think it's better to exploit the simplification of the drawing. And that's something I'll maybe try and highlight if I send you some examples of Hockney's paintings. I'll try and emphasize what it is that he does so well in simplifying. And I think just using the bits of card, sometimes cut a bit thinner to do some smaller shapes, you instantly see your simplified version, and it may not always be right, but at least you know what you've got. Now it gets a bit complicated in there because there's a cup, and I'll have to come back to that. So that's a couple of tones, light and dark, for her top, and then the same for her jeans. That lower leg is a bit darker, which is quite nice because it's going back. And this one has some light on the side. And now I'll just put on the lighter colour to the jeans. And then I'll deal with the head. So I made some colour for her hair, something dark. I'll use the card for that. And I think I might use the brush for the face because it's quite small. I didn't get around to mixing anything for lighter hair. I've got a slightly bigger brush. I've mixed up a warm mid-tone. For her ear. And the shadow on the head. Maybe a wee bit on the nose. and then some on the hands. And I'm not entirely sure about the hands of the cup. It's all a bit complicated in there. That's got a bit, paint isn't clean. Now I've picked up some of the cup. That's fine. Okay, and then lastly, same brush but cleaned and dried. I made a lighter colour for her, for the light on the face, which is very, very orangey. That might be alright. As I said, I hadn't tried these colours out, but I think one of the great things with oil paint is that you can work provisionally like this, and if you've got a stock of colour and it isn't right, you can just adjust it, because you really need to know how colours react with each other to see whether they're too strong or not strong enough, and so on. So the detail of the cup, as I've said, I haven't fully understood yet. I might have to go back to my drawings. Probably it would be good to get a little bit more window up here. Get maybe some of that brown. Maybe I've got to make a lighter colour for the shutter. And there's various areas that I haven't worked on, but that's just to give you an idea of how to go from drawing it out to blocking in some pre-mixed colours and working generally, so really simplifying things. And with a bit of luck, if you make some good decisions about what's significant, the dark curtains, the pattern of light between, in my painting, a dark subdued area and then more attention over here, you can see a lot of that at the beginning, and you can adjust your colours accordingly. So I'm going to stop the demonstration there. I'm hoping that that's enough to get many of you started. I've used oil paint, but you may not be set up for that. We probably need to discuss as well. I'd suggested I could perhaps get materials to people, so we'll see what you're lacking and see how I can supply them in some, possibly. So that's to get it started, and I'll work on it a bit more and show you a photograph, maybe with some details of what I did next. And hope that you can follow this process through. So starting with the photographs and your drawings, and then beginning to turn them into a painting. Okay, go well.